You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. We are on this episode of the Write Project podcast with Tracey Waddleton, who is from Tracey, Newfoundland. She recently just put out a book through Breakwater Books called Send More Tourists, The Last Ones Were Delicious, which is a collection of absolutely wonderful and hilarious and surreal and dreamlike short stories. I got sent this by someone at Breakwater and read through it, and it is just hilarious. Like, they sent it to me and said, "We have something that's up your alley, Matt." And I'm like, what? And they weren't wrong. It's pretty amazing short stories. But yeah, we have the author on right now. She's been getting great reviews from Brooke Davis and Joel Thomas Hines, and just a lot of awards buzz. She's been published in Riddle Fence, The Telegram, Newfoundland Quarterly, Paragon, the Cover Anthology. You are just blowing up.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but I'm really glad that you like the collection.
It's so cool. I've got a big love for short stories. Some of the favorite stuff that I do on my side of things over here is work with short stories or short story anthologies and stuff.
Yeah, they're my favorite as well, which probably is what led me to writing them,
yeah,
I guess.
So tell me about these short stories. Is there an overarching theme in your head, or is it just a collection of stuff you had written to date, or what are you trying to accomplish here?
There's no theme. I don't think. Someone told me that my characters are often marginalized, so maybe that's a theme that I didn't consider beforehand, but I'm just kind of writing from everywhere and whatever inspires me. Strange little events in day-to-day life. I guess it's realism. But they're not linked or anything like that. They're all quite different.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you have a favorite short story from this group? I'll ask you yours first. I mean, there's one that the title is named for, so sometimes that's a hint, but sometimes that just means that it's a nice title.
Yeah, I stole that title off a tourist mug. I keep telling this story because everyone's like, great title. And then I feel guilty because I didn't come up with it myself. So that's the only reason that I like the title of that story, so it became the title of the collection. I think my favorite story is maybe Russia.
Okay.
I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah. That
story about the girl who's trying to make the plane ticket money to go to Russia and live there for a while.
Okay.
It started off as a dream. It was actually inspired by dreams that I had years ago, and then it just turned into sort of how would you get out of Newfoundland and get to Russia if you were sort of living minimum wage life.
It wouldn't be the easiest. Newfoundland is a notoriously hard place to fly out of.
Yeah, it's kind of a big trip. It's kind of far.
Okay.
I'm also a huge fan of Gogol's The Overcoat. So I think that sort of played, I don't know if you know that short story, but it sort of, kind of gave me this image of St. Petersburg and walking around there, and maybe that's what prompted the dreams to begin with. I'm not entirely sure.
Interesting. Okay. The title of the collection is just insane to me. I have to... So you're saying it came from a tourist book. I was reading it the entire time, the collection, going, I'm waiting for a Twilight Zone reference, which kind of brought me in. Twilight Zone was basically short science fiction stories every episode. But To Serve Man is a cookbook. Like, it had that kind of reminiscent of it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was traveling through New Brunswick. The title story is actually based on true events.
Oh.
Which I recounted to my aunt recently over dinner when I was in Newfoundland. And she actually started crying at the table because it was... I don't think I told my family that had happened. I won't spoil it for potential readers. But I had been in New Brunswick, and I was on my first solo road trip, and I stopped into one of these little tourist trap shack type things, and there was a mug with a shark dripping blood from its teeth. And it said, "Send more tourists. The last ones were delicious." And then this incident occurred on my way to the ferry, which you're probably aware of.
Yep.
And that stuck in my head, that title, in relation to that kind of harrowing situation. and that became the title of the story. I bought the mug, but I've somehow lost it in several moves.
What? Horrible. Okay.
Yeah.
I think my favorite short story of the whole collection, just because of the way it's written. Stories usually speak to me, short stories usually speak to me, but when there's a different style to the story too, like the way it's written, I find it's really gets me going, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, of course.
Yeah, I find that short stories can be more experimental, because sometimes, like, if you're trying a new writing style or a new point of view, it can be really difficult to stretch that over an entire novel because the premise might fall apart. But in a short story, you can be inventive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's part of the draw.
Yeah.
Of the short story. I find novel writing, I'm working on one now. I find it really more, you have to plan it more. It's more difficult to sort of get those visceral images in a short span of time. But I don't know, the short story is my favorite medium, definitely.
Yeah, and for that
reason... What's your favorite story?
Yeah, I was going to say, for that reason, my favorite short story is Three Men Walk into a Bank.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, so
I'm not sure if I've had, like, a lot of feedback about that one.
To me, it's just this brilliant because, for anyone who hasn't read the story, I'm not going to spoil, what it's about, but it's broken up into points of views from the three different men, and they're not, at least at first, I don't think they're at all named. So it goes the first man, and it tells the first man walking into the bank, and then the second man, and what he does when he walks into the bank, and the third man, and then it goes back to the first, the second, the third, and it's this great, excuse to jump point of views that would be difficult in another fashion. It's really cool. It's a really cool experimental little thing. It reminded me a bit of, almost in a better way, actually, about the way George R.R. Martin does it, where he'll do a chapter from a different character's point of view, like Daenerys, and then the entire chapter from her point of view. Tyrion, entire chapter from his point of view, and kind of jump around. But it's in a very short period of time, because it's a short story, so I actually think it works better.
Yeah, it was a fun little way to play with the story. I like to kind of experiment with how things are presented to the reader. I find a lot of short stories, well, I like short stories, which is probably obvious from the collection. Some are like 2 pages long.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any that are over 6 pages. But even within that small frame, it's kind of fun to like play around and see what you can get away with, I guess.
That's
cool.
Maybe
that's what I was doing there.
Can I ask how you do that? Because I find it genuinely difficult to write short stories. I managed to do maybe 2 in my life, and they were both ones where I was submitting. I never got in, but I submitted to like the cover anthologies, so I was under that kind of tight deadline, or word limit, I should say. But I hated writing short stories, and I find I'm more like, not that I'm comparing myself to him, but more like Stephen King, where you'll buy a book of his, air quotes, short stories, and it'll be 500 pages long with 4 stories in it.
Yeah, that's the one thing about Stephen King short stories that bother me, because it's an investment. It's like, 50 pages, each story, although they're great, and it's always worth the investment. But I don't know, I think the cover is a tough one because it's only 1,200 words, right?
So hard.
And I know that it's hard to pare down, and I don't really write like micro fiction, flash fiction, I guess they call it. I generally, I'm kind of a 2-page, 3-page type of writer. I guess I don't want to elongate anything, and I don't want anything in my stories that, causes the reader to get bored or causes me to get bored. If I'm getting bored when I'm writing it, I'm assuming the reader's going to get bored when they're reading it. And speaking of Stephen King, I follow the Stephen King rule of every time you write something, you should be able to take 10% out.
Okay.
I just write off the top of my head. I don't plan stories. I don't sit and think about them. I take a lot of influence from, I've read a lot in my life, and I have a wide range of influences, I guess. So I don't really think about it too much, but I'll write, 30 bad stories that nobody will ever see, and then maybe I'll get a mediocre one, and then I'll write 20 more, and then maybe I'll get like a good one. So it's not so much I'm intentionally writing short as I try to finish a story in one sitting as well.
Really?
So I think that plays on it. If I don't finish it in one setting, I don't feel like I have that drive for it when I go back, and then it becomes hard to complete it. So if I start writing and I have to leave the house or something, and I'm halfway through a story, I will finish it before I leave, even if it means rushing and kind of jumping over things, because you can always go back and fix it later. Sure. So I don't think I don't really know how to give advice on how to write short stories, because I don't really intentionally set out to do that. It just kind of happens. Maybe it's a minimalist thing, when you're a minimalist writer, and I don't give a lot of details, like flowery descriptions.
No purple
that sort
prose.
Of thing. I like the reader. Sorry?
No purple prose?
No purple prose. Like I said, I'll go in and I'll cut out stuff after I write, more than I'll be very hesitant to put something in unless I've missed a plot point or something, like if I get feedback that it's confusing and several people miss something, then I might go back and add something in, but it'll be like a word or 2 words.
Gotcha.
It won't be like sentences and sentences, yeah.
No, something you said just then, the idea of, you write a lot of stories. Sounds like you might write a story every day. You didn't sound that, but you didn't say that, but it kind of sounds like you write a lot of stories, and a lot of them, like you said, will never be seen by anyone. That's a really interesting, just from the world of that I inhabit, where I know a lot of people that write short stories and write them often, but regardless of how much they like or don't like them, because so much of their income, like trying to live as an author, is selling short fiction to various publications, they'll just send it out, and they've just got this spreadsheet of all of their different works and are just constantly sending it out to the different magazines and keeping track of what they've sent to where and what people have rights to, when the rights expire, all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of refreshing to hear, again, because it's been a while since I've heard someone say, I wrote a short story and nobody's going to see it. It's nice.
It's nice. I guess I'm kind of envious of people who can edit their own work really well. Okay. And I'm not one of those folks. I feel like friends of mine who are writing short stories, they'll go and they'll write a paragraph, and then they'll fix that paragraph, and then they'll write another paragraph, and they'll fix that paragraph. And it's very intentional. But I'm in my head too much, my own head too much, where I don't want to edit when I'm writing, so I try to kind of free flow write. Otherwise, I'll psych myself out, and I'll be unable to finish it. I'll think, oh, it's terrible, and that happened with Old Ben Walsh. That story at kind of the beginning of the collection is the second one, where I wrote the first paragraph, and then I went, this is terrible. And I got up and I went and got a cup of tea. And then I was like, no, you promised yourself you would finish a story in one sitting. Otherwise, you'll never finish. And I forced myself to go back and finish it. But those, that voice in your head that's always telling you, oh, this is no good. Why are you doing this? And so I find that free writing and not thinking about it gets ahead of that. And then when I'm done, if I look at the story and I'm like, meh, it's just not up to par, then I also don't really feel like my process is that I have the skills to go back and fix it and make it into something perfect. I mean, it's possible someday I'll get those skills and I'll go back through these older stories, because I have hundreds of them on my computer, and maybe I'll fix them sometime. But what I'm kind of looking for is the gem that comes out. That's just if you get one good one naturally, then it has a good feeling to it. It feels more like it flows better. Yeah. And if I go back and edit it, I'll kill it. I'll kill the story, I
do. That's wonderful. I love that. There's also, whenever an author says that they have a bunch of stuff that's not ready for publication, or a bunch of stuff that, oh, maybe I'll come back to it someday, I always get this lingering fear of, what I call Tolkienism, where it's I hope you don't get too popular, because then once we're gone, your next in line will just take all of your unpublished stuff and publish it posthumously, and there you go. All the stuff that nobody you didn't want anyone to see, put it in your will that nobody will ever see it.
Well, I think Kafka tried that, right? I think Kafka left, I don't know if he was published before he died, but I know that when he died, he left some kind of note in his will or instructions to his friends or family to destroy all of his stuff. And the fact that they didn't is the only reason that we have Kafka's work today.
Wow.
So, yeah, now then we get into that question of who owns the work once you've spilled it out, Like, is it yours? Is it the author's? Does it belong to the world or the reader? And I guess if you're dead, it doesn't matter.
That's true, and there's also, I'm always a big fan of the author is dead anyway, even if the author is alive. Like, the meaning is derived from the reader, not from the author. But if the author's literally dead, then, yeah.
But, Kafka.
Yeah. Kafka. Mark Twain had a similar deal, but very specific with his autobiography. They came out a few years ago. He wrote an autobiography, but put a note in it that he didn't want it published until 75 years after his death. And they stuck to it. And I'm like, really?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder why 75 years. He was waiting for everybody he knew to pass away as well.
It must have been, but, which is funny because it just so happens that now copyright is 75 years after the author's death.
Oh.
So
but it wasn't at the time?
Oh, God, no. It was within your lifetime at the time. At the time he was writing, copyright was, I think, 20 years or 25 years after first publication. So, Sherlock Holmes went into the public domain while Arthur Conan Doyle was still alive. But that would never happen today. Send More Tourists will be under copyright to you until 75 years after you aren't here anymore. Not to get morbid.
You're hesitating to say.
Yeah, no, that's a weird thing to say. Yeah, but any of my books will be copyrighted to me until 75 years after I'm dead, which I've met authors who think, yes, that's great. And I'm like, that seems ridiculous. 75 years is excessive.
Yeah, it's quite a long time.
Yeah. Oh my. So this is a wonderful, wonderful collection. You mentioned something about a novel you were working on. Am I allowed to pick at that thread, or is it too early to pick at that thread?
Well, I think I've talked about it before, and sometimes I wonder if that's the wrong decision. So I'm a little hesitant, but it's based sort of in Trepassey, or a Trepassey-like town, and follows the story of a young man who wrote a book and then was killed before the book got to be published. And it's actually inspired by true events.
Is it inspired by Kafka?
That's pretty much... No. What, did that happen?
No,
did
I'm
Kafka
just...
write something similar?
No, I was just thinking we were just talking about, an author that died without their work published, and...
No, but actually you bring up an interesting point I never really considered before. But no, it's a true story of a young man in my community who wrote a book and then passed away before the book was published, and then the book was never published. And it's kind of been this source of, mystery to me growing up in that community as to what the book was about and that kind of thing. So it's sort of an exploration of that. I haven't, I'm not looking at it in a nonfiction perspective. I don't really want to know about the real life stuff that happened. It's kind of based on this idea in my head from being a child and having heard that story.
Sure.
And yeah, so it's kind of about stories never told. It's kind of has that theme.
That's cool. That's an excellent theme to come at. I know what you're talking about though, what talking about a story before it's done. I find that we're storytellers, but I feel like I have this urge to tell the story, but if I tell someone the story verbally out loud, I lose the drive to tell it on paper.
Yes, yeah. I think that's the muse, maybe, right? I mean, I had a professor I would talk to a lot about the muse and angering the muse, that thing that gives you the story, if it does exist, or it's a part of your subconscious, or a part of the Akashic record, or something like that. But wherever it comes from, it's kind of like a gift, and I think that how you deal with it, it can interfere with its purity. If I sit and I tell people the plot points of a novel or a story, even if I would never tell somebody, I'm in the middle of writing the story today and it's about this, because I assume as soon as those words come out of my mouth, well, those words should have went on the page.
Yeah.
And I can either put them one place or the other, either the page or I can verbally put it into the world, but I feel like I don't get both. Or if I tell people about it, it interferes with the pure ability to write it from its source. I know maybe that sounds mystical, but
No.
it's kind of how I operate.
And
I think that's the same reason. Yeah, it's probably the same reason that when I sit and write a story, I have to finish it in one sitting, because I feel like I have that thread for a moment, and then it's gone. So if I don't finish it when I'm still in the vibe of it, at least get the main plot points down, even if I have to come back and like sort of reorganize it later because I'm rushing out of the house for a meeting, or I have to go to the grocery store or something. Even if I get the main plot down, it has more of a natural flow to it, because I'm still in that trend of wherever it's coming from. That path of thought is still there, but the next day it's not going to be. Or if I tell somebody about it, then I gave it away.
Wow. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. I just had an idea for a short story in my head that I will never ever write, but a story about a poker game between a bunch of muses who are all pissed off at their writers for revealing too much about their story or their process or whatever.
That's interesting. But see, if you hadn't said it out loud, maybe you could have written it.
I might have, but let's be real, I never would have. And I'm sitting here thinking, and as a twist, we revealed that they're all the muses of famous works that have had, like, derisive last seasons, and it's because, or divisive later works, like George R. R. Martin with the last few seasons of the show, or whatever.
Yeah, that was terrible, but anyway, yeah.
I mean...
I was really angry at the last season.
Are you a Game of Thrones fan? Or were you?
Yeah, I put off watching the series for a really long time because I started reading the books, and they're so good. And, that I didn't want to ruin the books by watching the series, but eventually I ended up just watching HBO.
Yeah.
And I got severely addicted, but I was very angry about the last season.
Oh, yeah. That's a common thing. Which, actually, that's
a whole nother podcast, maybe.
I stopped watching after season 3. I got bored with it. And then, like, when everyone started to talk about how insane and crazy and angry the last season was making them, I'm one of these trolls who's like, anything that makes people this angry, I have to see. So then I just binged the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, your approach to short stories is amazing. I'll love to check out your novel and have you on again if and when that ever comes out. But the approach to short stories is wonderful. And this idea of doing it all in one sitting, like sitting down, writing the entire, is great, but I think I've only done that once. It's scary to me. Just the idea of like, but I could see it being motivating, where it's like, you're stuck to this chair, finish it.
Yeah, I think it's a way of kind of not allowing that internal editor to interfere and sort of allow yourself to go crazy. Maybe that's, sometimes I think I reach into places that I normally wouldn't have if I thought about it. If I sat and went, oh, should I say this? My brain will probably answer no, like cut that part out, that's too strange. So I think it allows me to be more creative, because I'm not relying on my conscious mind to edit the work as I'm going, and I'm not having to shut it up, because I've learned this process of just like let it go, no matter how weird it gets or what avenues it goes down. Just here it's like letting the muse kind of flow through, I suppose. And I mean, like I said, most times it doesn't work. I mean, I don't write every day all the time. Like I'll have like a couple of years we'll write constantly, and then I'll have a couple of years where I'll barely write at all, and I'll be like a very angry, cranky person to be around, and then I'll sort of get back into it.
That's so refreshing to hear, because I'm in one of those years right now, and I'm just like, I hate myself.
Yeah, it's hard, right? I think there's a quote about that. I don't know who said it, that, there's nothing worse than a writer who's not writing. And I think it's really true, because you're sort of kicking yourself all the time. Like, why am I not doing this? And I admire those writers who can sit and get up every morning, and they have a routine and sit at their desk and they write for 3 hours, and then they walk around the pond with their dog, and then they answer, like I think Stephen King does that. Then he answers emails from his publicist or whatever. And I really admire that, because I don't have that sort of discipline. It's kind of just waiting for something to spill over, and I can't stop it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to wait, right?
Yeah. On my good days, or let's say my good weeks or good years or whatever, I have like a word goal. Like I'm gonna write somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 words that day. In that window, I won't go under it and I won't go over it either, because if I like write for the entire day, I'll burn out. You know what I mean? But I've been finding this summer, man. I don't know if it's just because it's such a nice summer. And, like, do you ever find that as an author, you have, on a nice day, you have two competing impulses? There's go outside and enjoy the day and get writing done. And no matter which one you choose, you're depressed that you didn't do the other one.
Yeah, for sure. I find that all the time. It doesn't even have to be a nice day. It could be like, oh, I'm supposed to go out to this event in the evening, and I promised myself I was going to go, but I'm in the middle of this story. And then I just end up sitting glued to the same spot for 3 hours until I get it all out, and then I've missed the thing, and I'm angry. If I leave in the middle of the story, then I've dropped the story. So, yeah, it's a constant battle, for sure.
Yeah, big push and pull. Tracy, what was your favorite childhood book? Your favorite book you read as a child?
Oh, my favorite childhood book was Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. It's about this girl and her brother who everybody leaves the island that they're living on and they end up getting left behind and they have to fend for themselves. I guess it's like a young adult book, maybe. Prior to that, it would have probably been Alice in Wonderland, which is pretty typical, but not the little golden books version, like the full book version.
Gotcha. The legit version.
The actual, real Alice in Wonderland, yeah.
What is the first book, Tracy Waddleton, that ever made you cry?
Oh my goodness, that made me cry?
Yes.
That's difficult.
Yes.
I can tell you the first books that terrified me.
All right.
I remember the first time I read about sex, but I don't remember a book making me cry.
Okay. What was the first book that terrified you?
It was definitely Stephen King. I'm thinking it was It.
That'll do it.
I'm thinking it was It. I was reading it in my room when I was a kid, and it was so thick. It was one of the little mass market paperbacks, and I was so terrified. I don't think I slept for that whole week. I just was like, I couldn't read it beyond a certain point in the evening, and I had to put it down, but it would just sit in my head all night. And then, of course, the next day I'd pick it up because I wanted to know what happened. And then the whole process would start again. It was horrible. I remember thinking, like, why are people writing this kind of stuff? Why are they doing this to me? But it's also, it was also really great. And then there was that movie with John Ritter and everything. It was one of the things I came to love in my childhood, but it was pretty harrowing the first time.
Have you gotten to see the new version?
Yeah, I saw the first part.
Yeah, the second one comes out soon. Yeah, it was okay.
I think the second part of the original movie was better than like the part where they're kids. So I'm hoping the second part that's coming out, it's coming out now, right? Or
yeah,
soon.
it's September 6th.
I'm hoping that's I'm hoping that one redeems the first one a little bit.
If I had
in my brain, they're still part of the same story.
If I had time, like all the time in the world and absolutely nothing to do with my day, like was independently wealthy and didn't have to work or do anything, I would cut together on my computer two versions of it. One that takes the kids in the new version and then cuts it together with the old version of the adults. And then does the, cut it together weird so that the wrong adults are paired with the wrong kids, just to see what that does with the story.
That's what you would do with your time.
That's what I would do with my time. That's
great.
Just see how Tim Curry plays against this new, crazy, weird one.
Yeah, which one do you think is scarier?
I don't know. I find modern horror not terribly scary because it's all, focused on jump scares, but, still images of the current one I find pretty scary. He looks creepier, whereas Tim Curry just kind of looked like a clown.
Well, old horror is about suspense more so than just the cheap jump scare, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's been lost a lot. I'm a huge fan of old horror movies, but new stuff doesn't really impress me very much.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Tracy.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Okay, everybody, please check out Send More Tourists. The last one were delicious, which is available right now from Breakwater Books, written by Tracey Waddleton. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.